My dear brothers and sisters, all these days, the theme of the Novena has been a loving heart, a generous heart, a caring heart, committed heart, and a patient heart. These are all virtues we are quite familiar with. What's caring, what's committed. But when it comes to a wise heart, it's like the heart, how's the heart going to be wise? It's a good question for us to ask. Is the heart really thinking and is it wise? Caring, we know. Compassionate, we know. Understanding, we know. Everything that the heart feels. But what's about a wise heart? When we talk about wisdom, many of us would also remember Solomon, the great King Solomon. He asked for God for wisdom. He asked God for wisdom. And when he asked God, we know how God poured it abundantly on him. And one of the few examples that we have is when these two ladies who are fighting about that one child, one saying this is mine and the other saying it's hers. They brought the child to Solomon. And Solomon in his wisdom says, okay, we'll cut the child in half. You take one half and the other take the other half. And with that, Solomon found out who that child really belonged to. The mother who said, no, let the other one keep this child because that's my child. So Solomon used his brains very wisely and he said, okay, we'll cut it. And then the right lady said, okay, don't cut it. Nice use of wisdom. If you want to read anything about wisdom stories and a little hilarious ones, look for Akbar and Birbal. Birbal is another nice, wise man. And I looked up this one story to bring out another part about how the mind is so wise. In one of the stories of Akbar and Birbal, Akbar's brother-in-law is very jealous about Birbal. So he convinces Akbar to throw Birbal out. Birbal comes to know that this is the plan, so he resigns before he's thrown out from his job. Another wise fellow. And then after some time, Akbar is not satisfied with his brother-in-law who's taken the post of Birbal. And so he wants to test this new minister of his. Then he calls this minister and he says, I will give you 300 coins. You use the first 100 coins to see that I get my money back. The second 100 coins you use to see that I get this money when I die. And the third set of coins, you see that you use it in such a way that I don't get it at all. So this new minister is quite confused now what to do, how to get this problem solved. And finally, he's so sick about it, his wife tells him, why don't you just go and tell Birbal, he will sort the problem. So he goes to Birbal, and Birbal tells him, okay, you give me the 300 coins and I will sort the problem out for you. Birbal in his wisdom says, the next morning he goes and he sees one rich man celebrating his son's wedding. And he gives this man 100 coins and he says, go celebrate. And he tells him that this money has come to you from Akbar the Great. And this man is so excited that he gives Birbal twice the amount of money. And he says, you can tell the emperor that this is from me for the king. The next morning, Birbal moves around and he goes in one slum and he buys a lot of ration for these poor people. He uses that 100 coins to buy a lot of rations for these poor people in the slum and he gives it lavishly to these people in the slum. And he comes back. All that they say, we will pray for the king, because he tells them that the king has sent this money for you all. And the third set of 100 rupees, he goes out and he organizes one contest, and whoever comes to sing and dance for that contest, he gives the money and they all go away. The next day he goes to Akbar and he tells Akbar, your minister wanted to sort this problem out. He gave me the money. I took the money and this is what I did. The first 100 coins has brought you double the amount. Akbar is very happy. The second 100 coins has brought you blessings in heaven because these poor people are going to pray for you and you can be sure you'll be blessed in heaven. And the third set of coins, I gave it to these people and they have taken it and gone away. So you will not get it and neither will I get it. And here you see wisdom again overflowing from the brains of Birbal. But where's the heart in use? How do we know what is happening at the heart level? I've given you two examples to show you when we talk about wisdom, we are so much focused on the head. The mind must think of ideas, the mind must do things, but where is the heart? Two questions. What is generated in the head and what is generated in the heart? In the head, even now while you're sitting, so many thoughts are going on. Our thoughts are generated, our minds are filled with ideas and thoughts. And what is generated in the heart, at the heart level? Even the other days you had a loving heart, a compassionate heart, a caring heart, a patient heart. What is that is generated there? They are the feelings that are generated at the heart level. And so if you're looking for something to know about the wise heart, my dear brothers and sisters, it is the combination of the mind and the heart at work. It's the combination of the thoughts and the feelings at work. The mind tells us one thing, the feeling tells us another thing. Who do we really listen to? If I listen to only my mind, I can go wrong. If I listen to only my heart, I can go wrong there as well. It's the combination when we use the mind and the heart to find what God wants. It's the combination of these, the mind and the heart, that really will tell us what God really wants of us. God generally will speak at the heart level, but the mind will play with it. And God also speaks at the mind level, and the heart plays with it. It's like any young boy. Suddenly he sees, boys, don't feel really bad if I use your example, but it's like a boy, he sees a girl. And now he's so fascinated about her, he's so filled with emotion about her, and he wants to go and propose to her. And the mind is telling him, see, that's not the girl for you, just control. But his heart and his bubbly nature is so filled with that emotion that he wants to go and tell this girl. And the mind is telling him, guy, just wait. She's not the right type of girl for you, or it's not the right time, but he wants to. Now, if he follows only his heart and he's going to tell her, I love you, probably it's not going to be the best decision. Also, probably if he listens only to his mind and he doesn't pay attention to what's happening in his heart, he will also make a mess. The best for understanding a wise heart is the founder of the Jesuits. It's not that because I am a Jesuit, I'm telling you about the Jesuits, but he is the man who brought about discernment, and he made it something so common and something so easy for all of us to use. Discernment is very close to decision making. Everyone is constantly making decisions. You decided to come for Mass, you decided not to stay at home, you will decide what to eat in the night, you will decide what time to get up in the morning, you'll decide whether to play with your mobile in the night or you'll decide to put it off. Decision making. Discernment is a little different. These young boys understood exactly what I was saying. Discernment is something in the decision making that brings in the God element. Even when I decide, I'm deciding for myself. Because I want happiness, I'm going to decide whatever gives me happiness. But when I discern what gives God happiness. Where is the God element in my decision making? So I'll just give you in brief how St. Ignatius understood. Ignatius, he was born in 1491. A man given thoroughly to the vanities of the world. He wanted to be a rich man. He wanted to be famous. He lost his mother when he was a child, brought up by his eldest brother's sisters, lived a life in the court of a king. In those days, they had a lot of kings and princes, and he lived in the court there, aiming always to be great. He had to be a rich man. He had to marry a woman who was extremely high in society. He wanted to be in the military, and so he got himself trained in the military. And by the time he was in his late 20s, he was the commander of an army in this castle of Pamplona. He was a Spanish. They were protecting the castle of Pamplona, and the French came to attack this castle of Pamplona. The battle kept going on, and during this battle, all his soldiers decided to give up because they realized that they were surrounded and they had no option but to give up. But Ignatius was such a man that he got them convinced that they have to fight back. And so they started fighting back. But at one time, one cannonball broke through the wall of the castle and it shattered his leg. He was thrown off the floor. The army was in a disarray. They gave up. The French got into the castle, and the French now had two options. The French had the option to kill this military commander because he was the one who kept fighting and he had many of their soldiers killed, or they had the option of just letting him go. And surprisingly, the French decide to tie up his leg and send him home to his castle in Loyola. And so he's sent back to Loyola. There Ignatius is recovering. It takes a long time to recover. His recovery is a real painful recovery because his bone is shattered. At one time, when the bone is set, he realizes that one part of the bone is jutting out. He gets that bone cut In those days, in 1521, when it happened, there is no anesthesia, there are no painkillers, there are no drugs to kill the pain, and he gets his bone cut just to make sure that he looks proper. And then in his recovery process, when he's lying in his bed in Loyola, he wants to read something, and he wants to read books of chivalry, books of women, books of glamour and glory, because that was his ultimate aim, to become a glorious and a great man. And so he asked for books. And in his house, there are only two books, Life of Christ and Life of Saints. And Ignatius, the man he is, he rejected those two books. He said, these are not the books that I will ever read in my life. But in the 16th century, in those days, there was no printing press that books could be brought from anywhere and everywhere, and he could read. So he remained a long time without reading those books. Now finally he had nothing to do, and his legs were taking really long to heal. So he took those books to read. Then he started reading those books. Then he started reading in the Life of Saints. This is what Saint Francis of Assisi did. He went preaching. He went and he did so many things for so many people. He helped the poor. And Ignatius started realizing that when he's reading those books, he started feeling happy. Very nice he started feeling. Then he started reading something about Saint Dominic. Dominic was a great preacher, preaching, doing this, that, going across the place and preaching. And he realized that even he's feeling happy. Then he started asking himself, if Dominic could do this, if Francis could do this much, why can't I also do something great? I also can do. I will fast much more than them. I will preach much longer than them. And these thoughts remained with him. And at other times, he started fantasizing about this woman he's going to marry. And then he started fantasizing about these military experts and expertise that he's going to get back into when he's off the bed and he gets back into the army. Now is when Ignatius finds the greatest discovery in himself. When he was dreaming about the military fights that he would get back into, when he was dreaming about the woman that he would marry, he found himself thoroughly happy and excited. At the same time, he found that when he was reading and dreaming about Francis of Assisi and Dominic and the other saints, he also found himself happy. Then he found that when the thoughts about being in the military again, and the thoughts about marrying this rich woman, and the thoughts of getting and fighting back in the army had vanished, the happiness had also vanished. The feeling of happiness had gone with the thoughts. And then he started noticing that all his thoughts, when they had vanished about doing things like Francis of Assisi and Dominic and the other saints, when the thoughts had vanished, the feeling of happiness continued. And that is when he realized that God was telling him that if you do something like this way, your happiness will be lasting. That is when he came out with his understanding of discernment, finding what God wants of him. After that, the life of Ignatius changes. He leaves all of that, he leaves his house, and he starts finding what is it that God wants of me. Now he has to make this distinct move from his life. Either he continues to follow his dream and pursue that dream about marrying this rich woman, getting back in the army, that's what his thoughts were telling him. Or following now these feelings that are telling him that if you do what Francis does, full of suffering, if you do what Dominic does, full of suffering, you are going to be happy. He makes that choice. And then he understands that God speaks at that heart level and he tells you something through the mind. The mind will rationalize and tell you that this is what you are feeling and that is what is right. The combination of the heart and the mind tells you that this is what God wants. Following either of the mind or the heart blindly does not give us happiness. Happiness comes when we know that this is exactly what God is telling me, because that happiness gives you that lasting happiness. There is a sense of satisfaction that when I do this, I will be happy. And it's not that we don't do it in our daily lives. Many of us do it, but we don't even realize that we're doing it as part of our normal life. It's like if you see a beggar, there is something within you that will tell you, give him money. And the mind can also tell you, the government has said, don't encourage begging. If you give him, you are doing something against the law. And the heart is telling you, give it to him. You have plenty. And even if you give him 10 times, you will still not go into a loss. And you give the money. You'll realize that you are still a happy person. And many of you, if you have given money like that way, will still feel happy about the fact that you gave it. And if you have not given, you will still regret the fact that you did not give it. Even at home. If there are like 4 ice creams, and there are 5 of you, and this thing comes that, let me leave it. If it's from the parents, can I leave it for my children? Or if it's from the children, it can be, can I leave it for another sibling? And if I'm able to follow that and hold on to that feeling, and I say, okay, I forgo that for the sake of the other, the satisfaction and the happiness is more lasting than eating that ice cream and digesting it and getting it out of the system. That is a discerning heart. That is when you pick up that is what God is telling you. Your brother or your sister or your son or your daughter would enjoy it more, and you let go. And your heart says, give it up. The mind says, give it up. And you pick on that and you hold on to that. My brothers and sisters, that is your discernment, and that is what God would have wanted of you. And today when Jesus talks in the gospel about being this one who can take up the cross and follow me, the cross is not the big cross. The cross is these small things that come in our life. God lets these simple things come in our life, and we've got to discern whether that's the cross I should carry, or I should say, no, I want to eat means I want to eat. I should not give it up. But this feeling that happens within my heart and says, just do it for them. Just help. Just go out. That is what God is telling us. And that's why when in today's gospel is a little strong one. He's asking us first to renounce mother, father, brother, sister, uncle, auntie, wife, everyone. Then he's saying renounce your possessions also. But what he's telling, he doesn't say to negate them. But what he's saying is, get your priorities right. If your priorities are right, and if Christ is your priority, then the others in your family or in your life will not be a hindrance to you in following me. It's like, even in a family, you have a feeling of going for mass, but the spouse or the children are saying, no, why you want to go, sit with us? And there's something telling you, go. There's going to be no harm if you sit back at home, and there's going to be no harm if you're going to go for mass. And you take that decision and you go. And that is that discernment that when Jesus says, keep me before all the rest. And there are often times when you have to find your God in them, in your husband, in your wife, in your children, in your parents, in the people whom you love and in the people whom you don't like. And that is the challenge for us, my dear brothers and sisters, to find what is God really, really calling me to? What is He asking me to discern? To use the mind and to use the heart together to find that this is what God wants of me. If we follow that, if you're able to discern that, trust me, you found what God wants you to do. And if you find what God wants you to do, for those few moments, you are at the peak of your holiness. At other times, we fall from our holiness. But there are many times in the day when we know and we are convinced that this is what God wants of me and I do it, I have reached that holiness. So I pray for you, my dear brothers and sisters, and for all of us, that we are able to discern what is it that God wants of me. Where can I find it? How do I listen to my heart as well as to my mind? How do I use both of them to find out what is it that God would be happy with?